Have you ever sat across from someone you thought you understood very well? It might be a colleague. It might be a friend. It might even be your partner. They speak politely, behave properly, and everything on the surface seems fine. But inside you, there is a feeling you cannot quite explain. Something is not right. You do not know what exactly is wrong. But your intuition tells you that behind that appearance, there is something you have not yet touched. According to the psychologist Carl Jung, everyone has a persona, a social image layer, to live correctly, to be accepted, to avoid being judged. No matter how well someone manages their image, there are psychological signs that are very hard to hide. And those signs often reveal the real person behind the mask, not through what they try to tell you, but through what they struggle to control. You may think, maybe I am overthinking, or maybe I am being suspicious, but trust this. That persistent feeling rarely appears without a reason. It is like a small signal telling you that something does not match between what they are showing and who they truly are. You may not be able to point to it right away, but what you are sensing is real. In this video, I will guide you through 8 signs, 8 very small but extremely clear points where the mask often slips off by itself. Others may overlook them, but if you pay attention, you will recognize them immediately. And pay special attention to the 8th sign, because there you may not only see clearly who the other person really is, but you may also have to look back at yourself, at the deeper parts you have long been avoiding. Sign 1. Shadow map. Who do they judge most harshly? Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." When you observe someone judging another person extremely harshly, you do not need to rush to conclude whether they are good or bad. You only need to understand this. The intensity of their judgment reveals an inner tension. The more fiercely they condemn a certain type of person, the more likely they are to be trying to push something similar out of their own self-image. There may be a moment when you are having a perfectly normal conversation with someone. They are polite, reasonable, proper, and everything seems appropriate. Then, you accidentally mention a certain type of person. In that very instant, you hear a change. Their voice becomes sharper. Their speed increases. Their emphasis grows stronger. When you touch a certain type of person or a certain topic, you hit a sensitive spot in them, something they once experienced, feared, struggled with, or were hurt by, and their reaction suddenly flares up more strongly than usual. You will notice this is not a gentle comment. It has intensity. Some people, the moment they hear about a certain group, immediately burst out, "I hate that kind the most." And strangely, the person being talked about is not even here. There is no direct conflict, yet their emotion looks as if they are facing the person in real life. Their face tightens, their words sharpen, their eyes grow slightly cold, sometimes with a sarcastic smile, as if they need to prove they stand on the right side. In moments like this, most of us fall into a very familiar reflex. We want to understand correctly, so we hesitate. Are they just straightforward? Am I being too sensitive? You also do not want to judge them as bad too quickly. Everyone has things they dislike. But what feels different is that the discomfort goes far beyond the situation. Their reaction is not only about what you are talking about, but about something already inside them that has been touched, so it erupts more strongly. Jung called this projection. When a part of ourselves is rejected, it often appears in the way we judge others, especially when emotions rise abnormally. You do not need to become an analyst. You only need to notice 2 very simple things: who they are aiming at, and with what intensity. The stronger the intensity, the more likely it is a sensitive point inside them. Some people are extremely irritated by those who show off. Whenever someone mentions achievements, they become sarcastic. Whenever someone is praised, they shake their head and say, "Just showing off." On the surface, it sounds like they hate superficiality, but if you are close enough, you will notice a subtle detail. They are especially sensitive when others are recognized, especially when it happens in front of someone with the power to evaluate. Their attitude changes so quickly that you do not need to guess. They become less cooperative, they grow dry, or when someone is praised privately, they feel irritated. or their pride is touched. So they try to shrink the compliment by shifting the focus to the whole team. So the praised person is no longer outstanding. You will begin to understand that maybe what they cannot stand is not showing off. What they cannot stand is the feeling of being placed next to someone who is being seen. Because deep inside, they also want to be seen. They also want to be recognized, but they do not allow themselves to want that. Because they fear that if they admit it, they will become the very thing they hate. So they choose a safer way, judging others to keep their own image right. Imagine you have a colleague at work who constantly criticizes people who like to show off. One day, the boss praises someone's good report in front of the whole department. You see that colleague give a thin smile and immediately insert, "Well, it's thanks to the whole team anyway." It sounds fair, but afterward they keep dropping little remarks to weaken the compliment, like, "That client was easy." The report followed the template. Anyone could do that. At break time, they casually say, "People who like being praised always exaggerate things." And you realize that what bothers them is not showing off, but the moment someone else is being seen while they feel themselves placed aside. Or a friend may talk about social media with disdain. Everyone lives a fake life. They speak as if they stand outside of it. But then you notice they still open their phones several times after posting. They still check story views. They still feel slightly restless when no one responds. You hear them criticize and feel strange, because their mouth despises living virtually, treats it as something contemptible, as if they are different from those people. But their behavior shows they care about exactly what they criticize. Posting and checking repeatedly, watching views, and feeling uneasy when there is no reaction. Those actions are telling the truth about their inner needs. They also want attention, want recognition. They just do not want to admit it. So they criticize others to keep the image that they do not need it. Have you ever seen situations like this in your life? When you understand this, you will get less trapped in meaningless arguments. You will no longer rush to side with them, to belong to the same camp, nor rush to argue, to create tension. You simply note quietly, this is where they are touched. And naturally, you keep just enough distance, so you are not swept into their emotions. You do not need to prove anything. You only need to notice, and that is enough. Naturally, you will not be pulled into the urge to prove yourself right or to please them by agreeing. This also frees you from a very important burden, stopping the habit of constantly checking yourself whenever others become harsh. Because many times, that harshness is not information about you. It is information about a battle inside them, something they have not yet been able to name. And when you see that, you will communicate more calmly, know when to stop, when to change the subject, and when to be silent to protect yourself. If you ever hear someone judging a certain type of person extremely harshly, just note it. You do not need to conclude anything right away. Simply by recognizing it, you already see a little more clearly, and often in that very moment, you will feel calmer. Sign 2. Mask collapse. How do they react when their image is challenged? When the image someone wants to protect is touched, they react instinctively and reveal a part of their true self. The other person may not catch on right away, but you will notice the gap between the version they perform and their real reaction. Some people sound very reasonable when commenting on others, but the moment they receive even a light suggestion or are asked a very small question, you suddenly see another version appear. And that is when the mask begins to slide down. When someone is still controlling their image well, it is very hard to know who they really are, just from surface traits like being proper, polite, or well-mannered. Those things may be genuine, or they may be a layer they have practiced very skillfully. Only when a small situation touches the image they want to protect does the atmosphere change. And then you finally see their real reaction. Some people suddenly raise their voice, cut you off mid-sentence, speak rapidly as if trying to press you into silence. Some people explain excessively, explaining so much that you forget you only asked a very small question. Some people shift blame very quickly, pull other people's names in, list their past contributions, remind you how much they once helped, as if building a shield for themselves. And sometimes you walk out of the conversation with a strange feeling. Did I just do something wrong? Even though you were only asking something normal. It is precisely this exaggerated reaction that pulls you into an odd rhythm. You begin to adjust yourself to avoid tension. You choose your words more carefully, speak more softly, pull back your point, and try to calm the atmosphere. You do this even before you fully understand what is happening, simply because you want everything to return to normal. In the moment their image is touched, they can no longer control themselves as usual. Their instinctive reaction bursts out defensiveness, interruption, blame, coldness, silence. Not because they want to reveal themselves, but because, at that moment, they are protecting their ego faster than they can perform correctly. Do not judge them by how they act when they are in control. Look at them when the image they want to protect is touched. It is like a mirror. It does not flatter anyone. It does not care how you want to look. It only reflects what is actually there. Jung described the persona as a social layer everyone uses to adapt. When the persona is threatened, defense mechanisms automatically activate to protect the ego. You do not need to remember the theory. Just observe one very practical thing. When people are being praised, trusted, and seen exactly as they want, they remain calm. When they feel doubted, corrected, or seen differently, they reveal much more. In a work environment, have you ever experienced something like this? Someone always presents themselves as professional, punctual, and responsible. A project reaches its deadline, and it is late. You gently remind them, "How is that part going? We need to send it today." They do not answer your question. They begin to talk. They talk about how busy they were this week, how many tasks they handled, how slow others were, and how they once saved the whole team. Then they end with a sentence that makes you freeze. If everyone had done their part properly, we wouldn't be stuck like this. You listen and suddenly feel as if you are at fault, even though you only reminded them of a deadline. I once knew a man who always built an image of being calm, polite, and always mature in conversation. At a gathering with friends, another friend gently commented, "Earlier, you sounded a bit harsh to that woman." No one attacked him. It was just a small remark. But his face changed instantly. He still smiled, but his voice turned cold, and he said, "Are you all teaching me how to behave now?" When he went home, he stayed silent for days. No explanation, no questions, leaving the woman to feel she had overreacted. Only then did people understand that the calmness he maintained existed only when no one touched the image he wanted others to believe. There is a particular feeling when you are pushed into the position of having to apologize for something you did not do. You only gave feedback, you only asked, you only wanted clarity. But their reaction makes you feel unsafe telling the truth. You begin to choose silence to keep the peace. You begin to fear conflict. You begin to believe your emotions are troublesome. At first, you may believe they are truly mature. Because when everything is smooth, when everyone is happy, praising, not criticizing, not embarrassing them, they behave very properly, so you feel safe around them. But when you enter situations that require honesty, giving feedback, pointing out mistakes, disagreeing, or asking them to admit fault, you will find it difficult. Because they react defensively, they may attack back, blame you or others, or withdraw into prolonged silence to create pressure. And this costs you emotionally. You feel tired, tense, you measure every word, and you lower yourself to keep things calm. Recognizing this does not make you suspicious or bitter. On the contrary, it helps you stop blaming yourself. Because many times, you did not say anything wrong. You simply spoke at a moment when they could not tolerate the feeling of their image being touched, and their reaction says little about you, but much about the fear inside them. The fear of being seen as not perfect, the way they want to be seen. From there, you begin to make clearer choices in communication. You stop over-explaining. Stop trying to prove you are harmless. You speak shorter, clearer, and know when to stop. You understand why every time you touch a sensitive topic, the atmosphere changes, and you stop immediately assuming it is your fault. Emotional maturity is not avoiding all conflict, but knowing which conflicts are worth it and which only drain you. If someone just appeared in your mind, you do not need to conclude anything yet. Simply keep the feeling you have just noticed. And also think a little further. Have there been moments when you yourself defended like this, simply because you were afraid of being seen as wrong, weak, or no longer right, according to the image you wanted to protect? In the third sign, you will see even more clearly what image people are trying to protect. And sometimes, what you see in others is exactly what you also need to look back at within yourself. Sign 3. The mask they choose. Who do they want you to believe they are? After you have seen how someone reacts when their ego is touched, you begin to notice something else. The image they actively build in front of you. It does not appear in one isolated action, but in the way they repeatedly talk about themselves. They keep reminding you of a certain version of who they are, as if guiding you to see them in that exact style. And what they need most after saying it is your nod, your belief, your confirmation. Have you ever met someone who often says, "I'm a very straightforward person"? After that sentence, they allow themselves to say almost anything without taking responsibility for how others feel. You will meet people who constantly repeat, "I'm kind," and they become extremely sensitive when others do not repay that kindness with gratitude. You will also meet people who insist, "I live by principles," and then those principles become a card they use to make everyone else move according to their rhythm. What is striking is that they do not say it just once. They repeat it again and again, like a reminder, like a frame they place around you. After hearing it many times, you begin to feel pulled into the position of having to acknowledge it. If you do not respond strongly enough, they steer the conversation back to repeat it. If you give feedback, they return to that label to protect themselves. And slowly, you realize they are investing a great deal of energy to keep that image standing firm. I once heard a story about a man, after divorce, who kept repeating one sentence. "I was the one who gave up everything, the one who suffered so things could end peacefully." He said it in many conversations, with friends, with new acquaintances, eating, as if he wanted everyone to conclude in advance that he was kind and noble. What made listeners uncomfortable was that whenever someone asked a small question, "So, how did the two of you resolve it?" his tone immediately changed, and he pulled the story back to how much he had sacrificed. The listener had no facts, but felt quietly forced to stand on his side, to confirm the label of good man he was holding. Being close to someone like this, you begin to feel conversations are no longer natural. It feels as if you must speak in a way that fits their image, fits the role they want you to believe. If you praise them in the right place, in the role they want to be seen in, they soften, become friendly, and relaxed. But if you say something slightly off, offer a gentle comment, or see them differently from the label they claim, they become cold, irritated, or distant. And when you ask why, they do not answer the situation directly. They simply repeat the label as a shield, as if that sentence alone is enough to end all questions. You begin to feel you are being quietly guided to see them only in one direction, only allowed to acknowledge the version they want you to believe, while the rest of them are not permitted to exist in the conversation. Jung once said, "Fundamentally, the persona is nothing real." This does not mean the persona is entirely fake. The persona is a compromise we use to live in society. But when someone clings too tightly to that compromise, they begin to live as if the label itself were their true self. At that point, the persona becomes a refuge, a place to hide from vulnerability, from imperfection, from the parts they fear being judged. Every role helps a person be accepted. Having a persona is not wrong. Everyone needs an image to live among others. The problem begins when someone clings to that role so tightly that they do not allow any other part of themselves to appear. Then the persona is no longer communicative, it becomes a shelter. There is another common role, the rational one. They speak clearly. Everything has logic, and everything has reasons. They often pride themselves on not being ruled by emotions. But when you try to speak about something more fragile, hurt, loneliness, the need to be heard, they avoid it. They change the subject, analyze you, and give advice as a way to close the conversation. You feel you need a hug, but they hand you a lecture. Slowly, you learn to stay silent because every time you speak about feelings, you feel labeled as weak or troublesome. There is also the role of the straightforward one. They speak sharply, sometimes embarrass you, then conclude, "I'm just honest. Take it or leave it." You will notice that truly honest people can speak directly and also receive direct feedback. Those who use this role as a shield only speak in one direction. They can say anything, but cannot tolerate being told the truth in return. When confronted, they switch into the victim role. I speak honestly and still get hated. And suddenly, you are the one comforting them. These roles are not here for you to accuse anyone. They are simply a way for you to recognize which role you are standing in front of. Once you can name the role, you stop being pulled into the need to please. You stop trying to prove you understand to be treated kindly. You stop constantly doubting yourself. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm difficult. Because you realize the conversation is being framed by the image they are trying to protect. This gives you clarity in communication. When they say, "I'm very kind," you neither rush to argue nor rush to agree. You hear it as information, and you watch what they need from that sentence. When they say, "I'm rational," you do not immediately drag them into emotion. You observe whether they truly have space for other people's feelings. When they say, "I'm straightforward," you watch whether they can tolerate truth coming back the other way. And sometimes, you will recognize yourself there too. There were moments when you needed a role to feel safe. "I'm fine. I'm strong. I don't need anyone." That role helped you survive a certain period. But if you cling to it too long, you become tired, because you must protect that image all the time. Seeing other people's masks is often a gentle way of beginning to see your own. Try to imagine. If one day they could no longer hold that image, what would they be afraid of? You do not need to dismantle them. Just keep a small question in your mind. Why do they need so badly to always be that kind of person? There is always a reason someone clings to an image so tightly. Not because they like acting, but because if they let go, they would have to face a part of themselves they have long been avoiding. Sign 4. Inner conflict, the inner war that makes them wear a mask. Once you have recognized the role someone is trying to hold on to, you may begin to wonder why they have to cling to it so tightly. Why do they keep repeating, "I am this kind of person"? Why do they become uncomfortable when someone sees them slightly differently from that image? The answer is usually not about you. It lies in an inner struggle within them, a very quiet battle between what they want and what they fear. There are people who, on the surface, appear very proper, very stable. They know exactly what to say to avoid being wrong, when to smile just enough, and how to appear in a way that reassures others. But when you stay near them long enough, you begin to feel a certain tension in the air, as if they are never truly relaxed. You say an ordinary sentence, and they think about it for a long time. You make a light joke, and they still stay guarded. They control every word, every look, every way they are seen. This feeling is not always frightening, but it makes you slightly uneasy or curious about who they really are, because they are always in a state of holding themselves together, always trying to stay right, stable, proper. They are like someone forcing themselves to maintain a very rigid posture, constantly controlling their speech, their attitude, their appearance, so that no one criticizes them. No one catches a flaw, no one damages their image. And when a person holds themselves like this for too long, they become exhausted and more sensitive than usual. So, when something small happens that does not go their way, a gentle comment, an extra question, someone phrasing something a little differently, the atmosphere immediately changes. They tense up, become irritated, react strongly, or withdraw. Their reaction at that moment is like an internal alarm going off very fast, treating that small deviation as a threat to the image they are protecting. So they defend themselves right away. Jung once said that what is denied does not disappear. It is merely pushed down and continues to live inside. When a person does not allow themselves to acknowledge a need, a feeling, or a desire, that thing still exists. It is only hidden, and the very act of hiding creates tension. You can see that tension in the way they must constantly hold their role, as if letting go even a little would cause something dangerous to happen. What matters is that inner conflict usually has a very recognizable structure. They want one thing, but they are afraid of being seen wanting it, or afraid of being associated with an opposite image. When desire and fear pull in opposite directions, they choose a mask to stand safely in between. And that mask is usually the part they want others to see, while the rest is pushed down. I once knew a young man in a work group who always said, "I do not need recognition. I work because I enjoy it." And when praised, he would smile lightly as if to say, "Whatever." But one time, in a meeting, the manager praised someone else for a part of the work that he had also contributed to. His face changed very quickly. He became silent, stopped contributing, and his attitude turned visibly cold. After the meeting, he said something that sounded indifferent. "Praise is just for fun. It is not important," and then turned to criticize the person who had been praised as someone who knows how to show off. At that moment, everyone could see what he said was, "I do not need it." But what truly hurt him was not being seen. Some people always present themselves as independent, as if they need no one. They say, "I can take care of myself. I am used to being alone. I do not like to bother anyone." But when you are close, you see they are easily hurt, easily disappointed, easily wounded when someone does not prioritize them. Deep inside, they want to be loved, to lean on someone, to have someone soften with them. But they fear dependence, fear abandonment, fear needing someone too much, and then being looked down on. So they put on the coat of, "I need no one," to avoid touching that fear. Brené Brown, an American researcher and author, once said, "Choose discomfort over resentment. Choose the short-term discomfort of telling the truth rather than the long-term resentment of swallowing it down." To avoid resentment, we need clearer boundaries, fewer expectations that others will just understand, and more courage to say what we need. Simply put, when you have to be kind to the point that you cannot speak the truth, that kindness easily turns into a silent, inner battle. When you understand the structure of wanting and fearing, you begin to see something else. Sometimes, what people call hard to approach is not arrogance, but self-guarding. They must guard their emotions, guard their image, guard others' eyes, and guard every reaction so no one touches the part they fear. And when someone lives like that for a long time, they become tense, sensitive, and quick to defend, because they are always in a defensive state, even when no one is attacking. This also explains why some people speak very properly, yet still make you feel tired. You cannot find a single wrong sentence, because every sentence is correct. But correct here is correct for safety, not correct from truth. Correct to avoid judgment, correct to avoid exposing fear. And when you are with them, you feel as if you are walking in a room full of fragile objects. You must be gentle, careful, and avoid touching anything. Have you ever met someone who, after only a few minutes of conversation, makes you feel you must be more careful than usual? No one scolds you, no one speaks harshly, yet you still feel as if you are walking on a fragile floor where one wrong word changes the atmosphere. And you realize you begin adjusting yourself before you even understand what is happening. If your answer is yes, what you need is not to argue about who is right. You only need to recognize that you are standing in front of a conflict. If you keep trying to pull them toward truth when they are not ready to face what they fear, they will only tighten the mask further. But if you see what they are protecting and what they are afraid of, you will know how to protect yourself. Speak just enough, stop at the right time, and not turn yourself into the person who carries responsibility for their emotions. And sometimes you recognize another person's conflict because you yourself once stood in a similar one. You also once wanted to be loved but feared being hurt. You also once wanted recognition but feared being seen as weak. You also once chose a mask to live safely. Seeing this does not make you soft in a weak sense. It simply frees you from being dragged into the game of right and wrong. Just understanding this much already lightens your heart. You begin to see things more clearly, and when clarity comes, life naturally becomes gentler. Thank you for walking with us this far. If these reflections resonate with your experience, you may like and share them to help us spread these valuable lessons to more people. Each share is a small action with deep meaning, much like the lessons Carl Jung left for the world. And do not forget, sign number 5 is waiting for you in the next part. Let us continue exploring and welcoming these timeless insights together. Once again, thank you for your continued support. Sign 5, defense mechanisms. How do they protect the ego? You talk with someone, and on the surface, the conversation seems normal. They do not insult you, do not raise their voice, do not make a scene, but after it ends, you feel uncomfortable and confused inside. As if you have just done something wrong, you start reviewing every sentence in your head, replaying the conversation, checking whether you said something inappropriate, impolite, or hurt them somewhere without realizing it. And apologizing before you even know what you are apologizing for means you are pulled into a position of calming the atmosphere. So you say, "I am sorry," just to keep things peaceful, not because you truly know what you did wrong. The other person does not need to scold you, but the way they react, the way they steer the conversation, or the way they use silence to create pressure makes you feel at fault and shrink yourself down. This lies in the feeling that you are being pushed into a lower position, the position of having to soothe, to fix, to prove that you are harmless. The other person does not need to raise their voice, yet they still make you pull yourself inward. And if sign 4 was the battle between wanting and fearing inside them, then sign 5 is the method they use to protect themselves when that battle is touched. There is something very real here. When the ego feels threatened, it automatically chooses a familiar way to defend itself. Jung once suggested that the ego always seeks to protect itself from what hurts it. You do not need to remember the exact words. You only need to look at one thing. When they are touched, they react in the same pattern again and again. That pattern is their defense mechanism. In everyday life, 2 types appear very often and easily exhaust you. The first is blaming, turning the issue into your fault. It is subtle because they do not say, "I am wrong," and they do not say, "You are wrong," in a blunt way. They simply lead the conversation to a place where you feel you should take responsibility, even though you were only raising a normal point. You may encounter it in a very small situation. You ask, "Why did you forget to message me today like usual?" You are asking about a behavior, a concrete thing, but the other person does not answer that point. They immediately push the conversation toward you. "You always demand too much. Do you not understand how busy I am?" And in that very moment, you are pulled away from what you wanted to say. From, "I feel sad because you forgot," you fall into having to prove, "I am not a demanding person." Before you finish expressing your feelings, you have already started explaining, lowering your voice, pulling back, just to calm the atmosphere. Have you ever thought you were being manipulated? Many times. You are simply disoriented in the conversation because the other person changes direction too quickly. You think you are talking about an issue, but they force you to talk about who you are as a person. And before you manage to hold the line, you slide into the role of the one at fault. You enter the conversation with a clear goal, to clarify something, to solve a problem. But you leave with a question about yourself. Am I too difficult? Am I too sensitive? Am I putting pressure on them? Suddenly, you are the one who needs fixing, and the original issue disappears. The second type is punishing silence. It is not loud, but it is heavy. They do not argue, do not speak badly, do not attack. They simply withdraw from communication, cut contact, stop responding, and close every channel you can reach. And that emptiness begins to work in their place. You send a message, no reply. You call, no answer. You ask, they only answer briefly. Okay, whatever. I know. You begin to feel anxious. You begin to guess. You begin to take back what you just said and lower your emotional level to calm the atmosphere again. And when they come back, they do not say, "I needed time." They speak as if you were the one overreacting. Come on. It is nothing. Why keep talking about it? If you have experienced this, you understand how uncomfortable it is. It is not a quarrel where you at least know how to respond. It feels like being suspended in midair, with no answer, no ending. And in that suspended space, you are forced to adjust yourself. That is why it is called punishment, because it creates pressure for you to return first, apologize first, even when you still do not know what you did wrong. Both of these defense styles have the same effect. They make you lose your equal position in the conversation. At first, the two of you are speaking as equals. You have the right to ask, the right to comment, the right to express your feelings. But after a few sentences, you are pulled down into the position of having to give in, to soothe, to apologize, just to keep the peace. You no longer focus on solving the issue. You only want the atmosphere not to get more tense, not to fall into silence, not to be blamed. Your goal shifts from speaking clearly to speaking in a way that calms the other person. And when this repeats many times, you begin adjusting yourself in advance, speaking less to avoid being criticized, to avoid being called sensitive, and asking less to avoid being labeled demanding. All of it just to avoid their uncomfortable reactions. The most practical thing you can do is not to keep explaining so they understand. Because the more you explain, the deeper you step into the trap of defense, where they can pull you into cycles of right and wrong, or pull you into silence. What you need is to keep boundaries. Speak briefly, speak clearly, and stop at the right moment. You can say, "I am talking about this issue. I do not want to change the subject." Or, "I need a clear answer. I will continue when I am treated with respect." If they use silence as punishment, you do not need to chase them for a nod of approval. You can stand still, keep your own rhythm, and let them know that silence no longer controls you. And there is one important thing. Recognizing someone's defense mechanism does not mean you have to hate them. It simply helps you understand that the conversation is being pulled into a familiar pattern. When you recognize that pattern, you will be less swept along, less self-blaming, less reflexively apologizing, and less shrinking yourself just to keep harmony. If you have encountered this kind of defense, you are not weak. You are simply standing in front of a repeated reaction style. And what can be repeated can be seen. If you have begun to notice it, quietly observe a few more times. You do not need to confront immediately. Just gather enough data, and you will naturally distinguish what a single accident is and what is the way they usually protect themselves. Sign 6. The ultimate test. How to verify. After you have noticed several signs and seen that this person shows distorted reactions, you still do not dare to fully believe it, because you are afraid you are too sensitive, afraid you are overinterpreting, and afraid that once you become guarded, you will start seeing everyone as fake. You want to ask directly to be clear, but you also know that just one wrong sentence can make the atmosphere tense immediately. And so you get stuck between two choices. Stay silent and feel suffocated, or speak and fear creating conflict. At this point, what you need is not a trick to catch someone's faults. What you need is a safe way to verify, gentle enough not to turn into confrontation, but real enough to see whether the other person has the capacity to look back at themselves. Because a mature person is not someone who is always right, but someone who can pause when reflecting. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Everyone has parts of themselves that are hard to look at, but not everyone is willing to look. The capacity for integration does not lie in whether they are good or bad. It lies in how they react when you lightly touch a sensitive point. Try a soft reflection test. You do not accuse, You do not conclude. You do not label. You simply state what you observe, then open a door for them to step in or close themselves. Your sentence needs 3 parts: observation, feeling, and an invitation to understand more. You might say, I noticed that every time we mention that type of person, you react quite strongly. Has this topic ever made you uncomfortable before? Or, maybe I misunderstood, but earlier I felt some tension from you, and I want to understand more so we can talk more easily. These sentences sound ordinary. They do not push anyone into a corner, but they are enough to see whether the other person can observe themselves. If you ask with suspicion, the other person will hear an accusation. So what decides everything is how you speak. You speak sincerely, without sarcasm, without mockery. You do not speak like someone testing them. You speak like someone who wants to understand to keep the relationship safe. When you maintain that attitude, their reaction will speak for itself. If they have the capacity for integration, you will see a brief pause. They may be silent for a moment to think, then reveal something real. Yes, I do get uncomfortable because before I was hurt by people like that, or I react that way because I am afraid of being seen like that. They do not need to say it well. They only need to dare to admit a part of it. At that moment, you will feel the atmosphere soften because you are speaking with a human being, not a mask. If they are defensive, the reaction will be different. They may attack back. Are you implying I have a problem? Or they may deflect. You are the one who overanalyzes. Or they may freeze, fall into long silence, become cold, as if you have just committed a crime. They may not say it directly, but you will feel a door slam shut, and you will be placed into the role of the troublemaker. This test is not for you to judge who is good or bad. It is for you to know something very practical. Are you standing in front of someone who can have a dialogue or not? Because a safe relationship does not need a perfect person. It needs someone who can look at themselves when there is friction. If just one gentle reflection already creates war, you will understand what price you would pay later when something bigger happens. You also need to remember that this test should not be used when you are angry or when the other person is in an extremely tense state. It only works when you speak with a clear purpose. I want to understand so that both sides can talk more easily, not I want to prove I am right. When you keep the right purpose, you will speak less, more clearly, and you will not be dragged into argument loops. I once witnessed a situation in a cafe. At the table opposite, a couple was speaking softly, but loud enough to catch a few sentences. The woman shared that recently she had been very tired, work was heavy, and her mind was always tense. The man listened for a few seconds, then snapped, his voice stiff. Stop being so weak. What is there to complain about all the time? The woman did not argue. She paused for a beat, then asked very gently, exactly in the style of soft reflection. Maybe I misunderstand, but every time someone talks about emotions, you seem to get uncomfortable right away. Has this topic ever exhausted you before? The man was silent for a few seconds, truly silent, not angry silence. Then he sighed and spoke much more softly. Back home before, whenever someone was sad, they were treated as a burden. So I hate that feeling. That moment was not about deciding who was right or wrong, but it showed one very clear thing. When you touch the sensitive point with a sentence gentle enough, someone with the capacity to look inward will pause, will soften, and the real part will begin to appear. But some people react oppositely. You ask gently, they answer coldly. Do not analyze me, then disappear, or turn around and call you paranoid. You do not need to chase them to explain. You only need to look at that reaction and understand for yourself. This may be someone not ready for dialogue, and the more you try, the more you will be pulled into correcting yourself. Before we continue, if this part touches your experience, you may share a short situation in the comments. Which type do you meet more often, the person who pauses to look at themselves, or the person who immediately goes into defense? Just one answer is enough to help you see more clearly what you are facing. We very much look forward to hearing your story. Sign 7. Projection. The mirror turns back to the listener. Up to this point, You have been looking toward other people. But have you ever had this moment? You meet someone, go home, and your mind keeps running. You do not remember what they said that was interesting. You only remember the feeling of being touched. And you begin to ask yourself, why did I react so strongly? A feeling that easily appears is that you start to read other people faster. You hear one sentence, and you know they are defending themselves. You see one reaction, and you can guess what image they are trying to protect. But the faster you read, the more easily you fall into a small trap. You focus on reading them so much that you forget what is also happening inside you. You also have masks to protect yourself. You also have sensitive places that are easily touched. And you also have reflexes that fire very quickly. So quickly that you yourself do not even notice them in time. There are times when you feel irritated and tired, not necessarily because the other person is bad or fake, but because inside, you are forcing yourself to stay tenacious to cope. You have to analyze every sentence, every attitude, so you will not be deceived. You have to guess their intention. Guess whether they are real or fake. To know how to respond, you have to stay constantly alert, afraid of being touched, afraid of being pulled into guilt, afraid of being manipulated. And when you do those three things continuously, your body and mind tighten, so you become tired. Tired because you have to stay on guard, not only because of the other person. You can sit and analyze them for hours, retelling every detail, every glance, every sentence to your friends. But when someone asks, "And you? What are you seeing inside yourself?" You fall silent. Not because you do not know, but because looking at yourself is harder than looking at others. Jung said, "Everything that irritates you about others can lead you to an understanding of yourself." That sentence does not mean everyone is the same, or that you must take all the blame onto yourself. It only says one simple thing: your strong reaction is always a piece of data. It can be data about the other person, and it can also be data about the place inside you that was touched. Try to remember, is there a type of person who makes you uncomfortable very quickly? Not the type you simply do not get along with, but the type that makes you heat up, want to cut off, want to judge, want to avoid. Some people are uncomfortable with those who like to show off. Some are uncomfortable with those who seem weak. Some are uncomfortable with those who are too confident, and usually it is not only dislike, it feels like something inside you has been touched. Some people hate those who show off, because deep inside they are always afraid others will think they are also showing off. Some people hate those who are weak, because they have become used to having to be strong. And they fear that if they allow themselves to be weak, they will collapse. Some people hate those who are ambitious, because they were once taught that wanting too much is bad, so they restrain themselves. And when they see others dare to want, they feel uncomfortable. You do not need to accuse yourself. Reflection is not for you to turn around and say, so I am just like them. Reflection is for you to see, there is a place inside me that is being touched. And just by seeing that, you already gain more choice, instead of reacting by habit. You see someone speak with too much confidence, and you feel uncomfortable immediately. You think they are arrogant. But if you are honest for a moment, maybe what makes you uncomfortable is not their confidence, but their freedom. They dare to speak, dare to claim, dare to appear, while you are always cautious, afraid of being wrong, and afraid of being judged. So you feel irritated, because they are living something you once wanted, but did not dare. Another kind of reflection. You meet someone who often asks for help, often complains, and often demands, and you feel tired right away. You call them annoying, but maybe underneath, you are touching your own need, the part you have always restrained to be seen as easy to deal with. You have become used to taking care of yourself, so when you see someone ask for things, you react as if they are doing something forbidden, and so you become tired both because of them and because of the part of yourself you have pressed down for too long. So instead of asking, "Who is that person?" try asking another question. What is that person touching inside me? What am I uncomfortable about? Is it because they show off, or because you fear being inferior? Is it because they are cold, or because you fear being abandoned? Is it because they demand too much, or because you have become used to being agreeable and not daring to need anything? You only need to name one thing correctly, and you will see that you are no longer dragged around by feeling. You begin to understand what you are reacting to and why it makes you tired. And when you see it clearly like that, naturally, you will stand more steadily, even if the other person stays the same. You will be less pulled into hunting for other people's faults. You still see the signs, you still set boundaries when needed, but inside, you are less tense. You no longer have to prove yourself right by judging others wrong. You only need to know clearly where you are being touched, where you need to protect yourself, and where you should step back. As long as you can answer just one question, you are already less lost inside yourself. And then you will notice something very gentle. You do not need to see through anyone to feel safe. You only need to begin to see yourself clearly. Sign 8. Return. Integration in action. By now, you notice others faster than before, almost as if you have a radar. But even when you can see others clearly, you yourself may still be stuck, because your reactions in real situations remain the same. You may even recognize your own sensitive points, yet when the real moment arrives, you still shrink as before. You still smile it away. You still have to keep the peace. You still stay silent, because you fear tension. And then at night, you ask yourself, I understand everything already, so why do I still do this? At this point, you need to stop, because this is where this journey truly begins to matter. It is not about seeing through others. It is about whether you can return to yourself right at the moment when your old reflex is about to pull you away. There are times when you walk out of a conversation and feel yourself becoming smaller. You are not scolded. You are not directly insulted, but you realize you have just taken a step back, swallowed a sentence, swallowed a feeling, to keep everything calm. And what exhausts you most is that you do it so quickly that you yourself do not even notice, as if it were instinct. Jung called this part integration, bringing what you once rejected back into consciousness so that you have a choice instead of a reflex. You begin to notice what you are doing at the very moment you are doing it. And then you choose again, even if only a little. And the important thing is this: integration does not require a new life. It begins with one small but real action. Small enough that you can do it immediately, and real enough to change your old rhythm. I once heard a friend talk about a period when she was always pleasant. Whoever asked for something, she nodded. Whatever was said, she answered, "Tit is fine." On one date, the other person said very gently, "You are always okay. Are you ever angry?" She smiled, and then at home she could hardly breathe, as if her chest were being squeezed. She realized that this pleasantness was not her personality. It was a way to save herself, because she was afraid that if she showed discomfort, people would leave. And for the first time, she did not send an apology. She opened her notes and wrote exactly one sentence: "What mask am I wearing?" And then wrote another: "What am I most afraid of?" Just those two sentences. And she felt herself return to herself, as if she had just pulled herself out of an old habit. When you can name the mask and the fear, you will notice something very strange. You blame yourself less. Because before, you thought you were weak, too sensitive, not strong enough. But perhaps you were simply using an old mechanism to keep yourself safe. And once you see it, you begin to have the right to choose another way. The second action is a boundary sentence. One short sentence. No long explanations. This is where many people hesitate most, because they fear being judged, misunderstood, or making things bigger than they are. But a true boundary does not need noise. It only needs clarity. You can practice 3 very simple sentences. I need some time to think about this. This helps you step out of the reflex to answer immediately, just to please. I am not comfortable with this way of speaking. This helps you protect yourself without attacking. I will respond after I calm down. This helps you avoid being pulled into tension when you are already overwhelmed. The key point is that you say these sentences in a normal tone, not challenging, not over-explaining. Because the more you explain, the more you return to the old role, the role of soothing, the role of apologizing, the role of proving that you mean no harm. A true boundary sentence is something you say to stay with yourself, not to persuade the other person. You can clearly see the power of such a sentence in daily life. A colleague asks you to take on extra work at the last minute with a favor tone mixed with pressure. Before, you would nod to get it over with, then be angry at yourself at night. This time, you say, "I need to check my schedule. I will answer later." That is all. You do not start a fight. You also do not abandon yourself. Or in a relationship, the other person says something that hurts you and then walks away, leaving you to guess. Before, you would chase after them to explain, apologize, and make peace to calm things down. This time, you say, "I do not want to talk while we are tense. We will talk later." That sentence sounds simple, but it is a step in returning. You no longer automatically rush back into the old rhythm. You will realize that the hardest part is not the words. The hardest part is the guilt that comes after you set a boundary. The feeling that you are overreacting. The feeling that you are selfish. The feeling that you are creating tension. And that is exactly where integration happens. You see that feeling, you do not chase it. You let it pass, and you remain where you are. From there, you will understand that you do not need to defeat anyone. You only need not to abandon yourself. Many people think maturity means knowing how to endure, but there is another kind of maturity, knowing why you are enduring, and knowing when enduring means betraying yourself. Carl Jung said, "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate." Many times, we think we are reacting because of others, but in truth, we are reacting because a part inside us has not yet been named. When that part remains unclear, it will pull us along like a habit. Then, we become silent again, endure again, shrink again, and then ask ourselves why we are tired. But the moment you can see it, you gain one more choice. You do not need to win against anyone. You only need not leave yourself. And just one true sentence, spoken at the right moment, is enough for you to feel yourself standing more firmly. You have just gone through a very clear journey. From the very first moment you realized that something did not fit, to the moment you understood why it was happening, learned how to test it, knew how to reflect on yourself, and finally knew how to return to yourself through a small but genuine action. And the most important thing I want to remind you again is this. These things are not meant for you to look at others with suspicion. They are also not meant for you to become someone who reads people and then uses that as a weapon. Understanding psychology only has meaning when it helps you communicate more clearly, set boundaries more firmly, and stand more steadily within yourself. Not to manipulate or to compete for power in a relationship. Among these 8 signs, which one did you see most clearly or feel most deeply? You do not need to tell a long story. Just one short situation is enough. You can share your perspective or simply say, "I have met this type before. I will read them all." If you found this video helpful, do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you will not miss the next videos about stoic living and personal development. You can click the bell icon to be notified as soon as a new video is released. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. I will see you again in the next video.